More people trickling in, but I think I'd like to start. We want to have plenty of time for the real talk and the questions. So let me begin by simply welcoming you all to What Matters to Me and Why. I'm Jonathan Fung. I'm a faculty member in physics and astronomy, and just on behalf of the organizing committee, it's just wonderful to see all of you here. Many of you know that this is the first season, first year in which we've had What Matters to Me and Why, and this is only the second talk. So some of you I saw last time. It's great to see you all again. But for those who weren't here at the first talk, let me just say again what the purpose of this series is. So these talks are meant to be a chance for members of the UCI community to to hear from each other, not on an academic level, but on a personal level. Each month, someone who shapes UC Irvine to his or her daily activities will give a short, informal talk, followed by ample time for questions and discussion. There's no prescribed topic. We simply ask each speaker to answer the question in an authentic way, what matters to me and why, and just take that question wherever it leads them as they're preparing their talk. The series provides a forum for speakers to talk about values, beliefs, and motivations, and perhaps to share how all of these are shaped by their personal journeys, not just their highs, but also the lows, and also how that animates what they do here in the university setting on a day-to-day basis. Through this series, we hope that we might draw inspiration from how others at UCI live out our core values, and we would also hope that this would strengthen bonds between the faculty, students, and staff who teach, learn, and work here every day, and that we'd also be able to celebrate both the diversity of this community and the commonalities that bind us together. This series is organized under the auspices of the Campus Climate Council, and I won't go into great detail about that organization, but you can find out more at the webpage where you register for the talk. Let me just mention two things. First, after this talk, we'll take a break for the holidays and finals and things. But our next speaker will be Clare, who is a professor of virology and molecular biology. He's also the director of the Cancer Research Institute, and he'll be speaking January 16th, so another Wednesday noontime talk.
And second, let me just say that we very much welcome your input, your comments, criticisms, suggestions for future speakers. And so you have in your hand probably a questionnaire. It would be wonderful if you would fill it out and hand it in on your way out. So now let me yield the floor to Doug James, who will introduce our speaker. Doug is a professor in the Department of History here at UC Irvine. He also directs UCI's flagship advanced program, which for over a decade now has promoted diversity and equity on our campus. In addition, Doug wonderfully chairs the organizing committee for this series of talks. And so it's a pleasure to invite him to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to add my welcome and thanks to you all for joining us for this next installment of What Matters to Me and Why series, now in its inaugural year. I'm especially delighted to introduce our speaker this afternoon, my colleague here at UC Irvine, Professor Clare. It falls to me to provide the essential details. She'll provide more in her remarks. Professor Yu has been a faculty member here at UCI since 1989. Before joining the faculty, she held postdoctoral positions at leading national laboratories at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and Los Alamos National Laboratory. As a confirmed humanist and a member of the Department of History, I need to forewarn you, what I'm about to say is all physics to me. As a theoretical physicist, Professor Yu has broad interests, ranging from disordered systems, biophysics, noise, to quantum physics. Her research has been recognized over the course of her career. She is a recipient of the prestigious Sloan Fellowship from the Sloan Foundation, and she was elected as a fellow in the American Physical Society. Professor Yu has a special relationship with Princeton University, where she received both her undergraduate and graduate degrees in 1979 and 1984, respectively. One curious fact that I learned is that Professor Yu has been a pioneer in many ways. When she entered Princeton, the university had only begun admitting women some 5 or 6 years earlier. Even though the number of women with PhDs in physics is slowly increasing, she is one of the most accomplished researchers in her chosen areas of exploration. We're lucky to have her here. This afternoon, Professor Yu's remarks will last approximately 25 minutes. She'll be fielding questions after her remarks. Please be sure to keep your questions brief, no statements. And above all, speak up when you ask your question. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yu.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I just want to thank Doug and Jonathan, the organizing committee, the Chancellor's office, and the Chancellor, and all the people who've worked so hard to make this happen. I'm excited about the series. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about things that we don't ordinarily discuss in the classroom or in our offices, and I'm certainly looking forward to the speakers who come after me. And I'd like to thank you all for coming today. So what matters to me? 4 things. 1 is my relationship to Jesus Christ and serving Him. Number 2 is friends and family. Number 3 is good health. And number 4 is my research. So why do those things matter? Let me start by telling you how I became a Christian and then how my faith has influenced my decisions and my perspective on the events that happened in my life and how I've grown in my faith since then. So when I was little, my mom told me that there was a God and that He loved me and that He was with me, and I believed that. And she said He had a kid named Jesus. And I thought, okay, a lot of people have kids. God had a kid. That's good. And we celebrate His birthday on Christmas, and we get presents, and what could be better? Then when I was in high school in the 70s, there were these signs and billboards, bumper stickers that said, Jesus saves. And I thought, saves you from what? So I read an article in Guidepost magazine, which is a magazine of first-person stories by Kenneth, and this particular article is by Kenneth Taylor, who did the Living Bible. And he talked about a period in his life when he was tormented at night by nightmares and seeing demonic visions. So I thought, okay, Jesus saves you from the devil, and I'm trying to piece this together. When I was in 11th grade in Florida, a classmate and I went to a small Baptist church one Wednesday evening in November, before Thanksgiving, sort of like today. And after the evening service was over, this friend and I had gotten in a debate, and we were running around this little church looking for a Bible to prove our points. The preacher saw us, and he asked what we were doing. We told him, and he sat us down on the pew next to him. And I remember sitting next to this guy, and he smelled strongly of bleach, because he had just come in from the backwoods of Florida, and he scrubbed down with Clorox to get rid of the chiggers, which are these nasty little bugs. So I'm sitting next to him. He smells of bleach. He opens up the Bible, and he says, God loves you, has a wonderful plan for your life, but when you do things that are wrong, it separates you from God. But when Jesus died on the cross, He took the punishment for your failings so you can be reconciled to God, become part of His family, and go to heaven. And that really affected me. In fact, when I went home that night, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I remember picking up the newspaper and trying to read a paragraph, and I couldn't focus on it enough to actually comprehend what the paragraph meant. So 2 weeks later, I went forward in that same little church and accepted Christ into my life. And it took me 2 weeks because I was afraid to get up in front of all those people. So I liked the idea from the beginning of being able to go to heaven because of Jesus. But what bothered me and what I wasn't comfortable with was the idea of Jesus as Lord or boss of my life. Because if I made Him boss, and I'd have to do what He wanted, and I had my own ideas about what I wanted to do in life, my goals, my ambitions, and I didn't want to, have someone else calling the shots. This is my life. So what were my ambitions? What did I want to do? I wanted to become a physicist. I wanted to become a successful physicist. And so where did that come from? Well, again, it started with my mother. When I was little, she read me books about stars and about Newton sitting under an apple tree. An apple fell on his head, and he thought of the laws of gravity. There was a red balloon. It went one way, and the air went out the back end, and there were the laws of motion. Then when I was 8, I remember reading a book called A Real Book of Science. And it said, when you're in outer space, you can't hear anything because there's no air. And I thought, that's really cool. And when I was 10, I read a biography of Einstein. And they described this theory of special relativity, where the faster something goes, the heavier it gets, and the slower time is, the slower time moves. And so I remember having these deep metaphysical discussions with my 11-year-old babysitter about what is time, what is space. You know, if you have a block of empty space, is there time in it? And so Nancy, my babysitter, was happy to listen to me because she got paid by the hour. And to this day, we're good friends. She's a very rich lawyer in downtown Los Angeles, and I'm a not-so-rich physicist here. So I went to college. I went to Princeton, as you heard, because they had a good physics department. And I had never done a physics problem until I got to college. But when I took freshman physics, they had these weekly quizzes, and I was failing these things. And so I started praying to God and asking him to help me do well on the quizzes, to pass and succeed. And after a while, it became clear that I was asking God to serve my goals, my purposes, my agenda, and he really wasn't interested in that. He was more interested in me serving him. So I would pray these prayers to surrender control of my life to him, to make him boss. And I prayed these prayers many times, which meant they weren't really sticking. I really wasn't giving him control. When I was a sophomore, I would set an agenda every day of what I needed to get done that day, a minimum number of reading, amount of reading of problem sets and so forth. And invariably, I'd fall short of my quota. And so I felt stressed, I felt pressured, frustrated. And eventually I reached a breaking point. And I went into a small private study room to just cry. When I got in there, I cried out to God and I said, okay, I give up, I surrender, you're in control, and anything I can't let go of, you rip out of my grasp. And immediately I felt release. I felt relief. The headache I had went away, the stress I had went away, and I just learned to try to do the best I could with the time and the abilities I had and leave the rest to God. The Lord has guided me in a number of ways through my life, and I just wanted to sort of give you examples of that. One, of course, is by reading the Bible, but another is through thoughts, and sometimes more than just thoughts, but these really deep gut feelings that I just know that I know that I know. And that's only happened to me twice. The first time was when I was a senior in high school. I was trying to choose what college to go to. And at one point, I just knew that I knew I was going to go to Princeton. And in fact, I got accepted, and I went. The second time was in choosing a graduate school. When I was an undergrad, I didn't really think I'd stay at Princeton for grad school, but I was lying in bed one night as a junior, and I remember in my mind's eye sort of seeing this giant sign Princeton kind of fall on top of me. And I thought, okay, the Lord wants me to go to Princeton. I just knew, and I knew that was what he wanted me to do. And so in fact, I was accepted, and that's what I did. It's a good thing I knew that, because there were a number of people who tried to convince me to go somewhere else. Normally, it's a good idea to go to a different graduate school than you went as an undergrad, but I knew that the Lord wanted me at Princeton, so that's where I stayed. Another way the Lord has guided me is through people. And sometimes when I'm bound and determined to go in a certain direction, it's the wrong direction, he's used people to redirect me. So a good example of this is when I was in graduate school, I had decided that I wanted to do quantum gravity. That's a specialty of physics that I wanted to study, because that was the nearest I could get to this dreams of space and time. So I was in graduate school. I was part of a program at Bell Laboratories called the Graduate Research Program for Women, designed to encourage women to go into physics, physical sciences, engineering. As part of that program, I had a mentor who was to follow me through my graduate career and give me advice and encouragement, and that was Doug Osheroff. Doug at the time had not won a Nobel Prize, but he would go on to win one. And I told Doug that I wanted to do quantum gravity. And he said that was a mistake. He thought that was a serious career mistake, and he told me so. But I just blew him off, because I thought, he's an experimental physicist. I want to be a theoretical physicist. What does he know? But the real problem with Doug's advice was that he was not telling me what I wanted to hear. So But Doug was right, and so realizing that his good advice was falling on deaf ears, he went and told Phil Anderson. And Phil Anderson is a physics professor at Princeton who even at that time had a Nobel Prize. I had worked with Phil for my senior thesis. And so Phil called me into his office, sat me down, and actually managed to talk some sense into me. And so I decided not to do quantum gravity and do condensed matter physics. And I think that the reason why Phil could get through to me is because I had such tremendous respect for him, and because he had taken the time, gone out of his way to redirect me and give me wise counsel when I needed it. So I did my thesis with him and graduated. Another way I've seen God's guidance is through circumstances. And as an example of this, I want to talk about finding a job. When you finish a PhD or doctorate, you then go on to these sort of 2 or 3 year temporary research positions called postdocs or postdoctoral fellowships. And so I did a postdoc at Illinois with Tony Leggett, who also would go on to win a Nobel Prize. And then I went to Los Alamos National Laboratory to do another postdoc, and that's in New Mexico. And after that, I applied to a number of places for a permanent job, faculty positions or jobs at industrial laboratories. And I only got one interview that year, and that was at Bellcore, which was a place like Bell Labs. But even though I got the interview, I didn't get the job. The door was closed. And actually, that was a blessing in disguise, because if I had gotten a job there, a few years later, Bellcore closed. Everyone who worked there was out on the streets and had to find a job, and I would have been one of them. So it was actually, as I said, a blessing in disguise. So I went back to Illinois for a year to do another postdoc with Tony for just 1 year. I started taking organic chemistry because my backup plan was to go to med school if I couldn't continue in physics. Again, I applied for permanent jobs, faculty jobs. I got several interviews this time, but no job offers. And so in March of 1989, which is kind of late in the job hunting season, I remember going to the March meeting of the American Physical Society. This is a big meeting with thousands of physicists. That particular year it was in St. Louis. And I remember lying in bed in the morning in the hotel room, waiting for my roommate to finish using the bathroom. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm done with physics. No job offers, and I finished. And I felt like the Lord said to me, well, you didn't ask me what I think you should do. And I'm like, well, fine, what do you think I should do? And he said one word. He said, wait. And I'm like, what kind of advice is that? I've been waiting for months, if not years. Nothing has happened. But in fact, a few hours later that afternoon, Doug Mills, who was a professor here, sent me a message saying that, in fact, Irvine would be making me an offer and they hoped I would come. And of course, that's what I did. You might think that since I went to Princeton, I must be pretty smart. The problem is that there are all these other smart people who go to Princeton. And so I, in fact, felt rather dumb when I was at Princeton. I spent a lot of my undergraduate career wondering why I was so much dumber or stupider than everybody else, and it just didn't seem fair. When I got to grad school, I studied together with a number of my classmates for these really big tests that we had to take. And I discovered, much to my relief, that my classmates were just as dumb as I was. And so I was quite relieved to know that. And I found that, my self-worth does not come from my net worth or my accomplishments. It really comes from God. My faith has also strengthened my values, my principles. In particular, I like to mention integrity and honesty. When I teach, I have a no tolerance policy for cheating. Anyone caught cheating in any of my courses, even if it's on a small quiz, fails the course. Because I want them to know the importance of honesty and integrity, and I think that's more important than any physics they'll learn in my course. So to paraphrase Rick Warren, I care more about their character than their comfort. I mentioned at the beginning a relationship with God, and of course relationships involve communication. In this case, that takes the form of prayer and reading the Bible on a daily basis, and not just praying for myself, but for others. And I found that others praying for me can be a tremendous source of support and strength. In particular, I think of the small church I went to in Illinois when I was a postdoc there. Even though I left in 1989, they still pray for me every day. I think they're praying today. God has also provided for me things I've needed. And in particular, when you do research, research funding is really crucial. It's really hard to get grants these days. If you apply to the federal government, about 10 15% of the grants actually get funded and most get rejected. And there have been a couple of grants I've gotten, I feel, because of the Lord and through no fault of my own. The first is an early grant I got from the Office of Naval Research. The program officer there heard Tony Leggett, who was my Illinois postdoc supervisor, give a talk about our research together. And this program officer gave me research funding because of that talk. Another time I got NIH funding, which National Institutes of Health, it's very unusual for physicists to get funding. And in that case, I talked to the program officer afterwards, and he said, well, you know, your score really wasn't quite good enough to get funded, but I like the proposal, and you've never had a grant before, and so I had money, and I gave you some funds. And so I really thought that's got to be a little bit of help from the Lord there. So to summarize, I learned to really obey God and surrender control of my life to Him as a college student, and in the years after that, I've learned to grow and trust Him that He really does have my best interests at heart. I mentioned friends and family. That's kind of obvious. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. My father's still living. Certainly, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the love and support of my parents. And I've been fortunate to have a number of really good friends who've been there for me, and I try to be there for them, and I'm sure you know it's the same for you. I mentioned good health, and the reason why I put that on the list is because 2.5 years ago, in 2010, I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. I had felt fine. I'd gone in for an ordinary routine mammogram. I got a letter telling me that they wanted to do additional mammograms, ultrasound. They said they saw a small mass. They did a biopsy. And the following week, I went up to the UCI Medical Center to a breast surgeon's office to find out the results of that biopsy. And I still remember the resident, and a resident's like a doctor in training, walking in, kind of looking at the chart and saying, well, since the results are positive, and I'm like, wait, what? You said the results are positive? I'm thinking, oh crap, cancer. And he's like, oh, you didn't know? I thought you knew. Well, yeah, the results are positive. So our conversation kind of went downhill from there. He wasn't very sure of himself. And so after a while, I'm thinking, go get the real doctor. But I can't say that to him. So I said to him, why don't you go and get Dr. Lane now? And so he goes out and comes back with the attending. She does not realize that I've just found out I have cancer. Most of the patients who come to her already have been told the diagnosis beforehand. So she goes and tells me the treatment plan, which is basically surgery, radiation. And half of me is trying to listen, and half of me is in shock. At one point, everyone leaves the room. I'm sitting there alone, my head down. The doctor comes back into the room. She sees me, reads the body language, comes up behind me, puts her hands on my shoulders and says, you're going to be just fine. And I'm like, that got my attention. And I hung on to those words of hope and encouragement throughout the rest of my treatment. I should say that doctor is Karen Lane, and she is giving the February talk in this series. So I'm looking forward to that, and I encourage you to come. Also, a great source of strength was the prayers and support of friends as I was being treated. But one of the things about getting treated for cancer, I felt fine when I had cancer. I didn't feel so great when I got treated for cancer. And the thing is, for the first time in my life, usually you don't have enough time. Suddenly, I didn't have enough energy to fill the time that I had. And so another resident suggested that I start walking to build up my energy, and so I started walking every day, and I still walk every day. Now I walk about half an hour a day. I also started eating more healthy, but that was not because of cancer. That was because at the beginning of 2011, Saddleback Church started the Daniel Plan, and they were emphasizing eating healthier, getting enough sleep, more fruits and vegetables, omega-3, fish oil, don't eat anything that has ingredients your grandmother wouldn't recognize, this sort of thing. And so I started eating healthier, and I feel great, and I've got enough energy to do what I think or feel that I want to do and what I feel called to do. And that brings me to item number 4, which is my research. I'm a theoretical physicist. My specialty that I was trained in is called condensed matter physics, which is the physics of stuff you can see and touch. It's not the stuff in the stars. It's not subatomic particles. And the research I was doing is called basic research, which means it doesn't really have practical applications. In some sense, it's not good for anything. But it was fun. It's fun. It's interesting. It's challenging. There are a lot of very good and interesting problems. About 15 years ago, I started doing biophysics, which is where you take physics and the techniques in physics and apply it to biological problems, just because I think biology and living systems are so amazing. But I really wasn't interested in cancer, because cancer was that thing that happened to other people. And suddenly it was not. So the day I got diagnosed with breast cancer was the day suddenly cancer became really interesting, not just for my own personal health, but also as a research question. So I've been trying to redirect my research toward looking at problems in cancer. I really don't have the right skill set, right? I'm a theoretical physicist. I'm not a cancer biologist. So that puts me at a bit of a disadvantage, but it's also a bit of an advantage, because I will come at problems from a different perspective. And the dream is to make a difference in people's lives. I think everyone who works on cancer has that dream. But in my opinion, there's no way that I can succeed, or me and my collaborators can succeed, unless God is in this. And I think I do see his hand. It's a little bit like a scavenger hunt. You get a clue and you kind of know where to go next, and you get another clue. And so as an example of that, I remember sitting in my office, and I never clean off my desk. It's a mess. I pulled out an old issue of Physics Today, which is the trade journal for physicists. And I flipped it open. There was a small article saying that the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH, had decided that they wanted physicists to look at cancer, because the cancer death rates really have not been going down. So in 2009, they took $150 million, started 12 physical sciences oncology centers around the country, each one headed by a physicist, or in some cases an engineer. And they hoped that this would somehow make some progress. And so I thought, well, that's neat. A little while later, it sort of thought kind of occurred to me that I should look this up on the web. So I looked it up on the web, and I noticed that the Princeton Cancer, the Cancer Center, there was one at Princeton, and it was run by a professor that I had known as a student, Bob Austin. So I got in touch with Bob, and he agreed to give us some funding for a pilot project. And so, you know, we're off and running. It's really hard to get funding, but in this case, we have a little bit, and we're excited. I'm teamed up with Elliot Botvinnik over in biomedical engineering. He's very creative, a little bit like Edison, I think. And Thea Telste, who's a cancer biologist at UC San Francisco, and we've got a fantastic group of students working with us. So I'm very excited about that, and I don't know what's going to happen, but you know, stay tuned, and we'll see what God can do. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and just to open it up for questions. So anyone have any questions?
Why did you choose Princeton, Clare?
Well, I told you, I really...
Einstein?
No, they had a good physics program, and I really, it was one of those things where I really knew that that's where I was going to go when I was a high school senior. So that was just...
Nothing to do with Einstein, having taught there?
Part of it was Einstein, part of it was just that they were famous for their physics, and so that was part of it. Joe?
What did you learn during that waiting period? You had a lot of waiting periods in your life. What did they teach you?
That I'm not in control, God is. You know, it's so easy, I think, to worry, because when you worry when you don't have control of something that you wish you had control of. And so I think in that waiting, you know, I just learned I wasn't in control, and you just try to, you know, hope for the best. But there's a lot of pressure and anxiety, uncertainty sometimes. Some other times, you know, you've got really sort of very peaceful, you're not worried, but a lot of times you are, so.
What matters least to you?
What matters least to me? That's a different series. I don't know. There's an awful. You know, you don't really think about the things you don't care about, right? So those are the things that don't bother you. What you spend all your time thinking about is all the stuff that bothers you. So, you know, I can't really think of what matters the least to me.
How do you reconcile the perceived differences within your faith and what you do, as far as what you study or research?
How do I reconcile the perceived differences between what I do and my faith? I don't really see there being differences. I mean, I think of ultimately as God as the creator, and he made the laws of physics, and boom, there is the Big Bang. Suddenly the universe shows up. So I don't view it as differences that really need to be resolved. And I think if you look at where science historically flourished, it was in cultures that had sort of a Judeo-Christian background, that believed that you had a reasonable God who was the same and had these laws, and that you could actually have a scientific method that would work. If you believe, like the ancient Greeks, that there are these grouchy gods, and if they woke up the wrong side of the bed on Tuesday, well, then everything would be different. Then you can't have a scientific method, because the laws will be different on Monday than they are on Tuesday. Any other questions? Yeah, Doug.
Claire, what about doubt in your life?
Doubt. Doubt about what? I think there's self-doubts, and there's always, like buyer's remorse. You get, should I have done it that way? Shouldn't I have done it that way? Is this going to work? Maybe this is, am I crazy to want to work on cancer? I mean, they're always, they're doubts. And so sometimes I think that's where you make a decision whether to go ahead and do that. Right, so.
How did you maintain your faith in God when you were diagnosed with cancer?
That's a very good question. How did I maintain my faith in God when I was diagnosed with cancer? Some people say, why me? I guess I never asked that, because I understand probabilities. And so, I mean, there's a 1 in 8 chance that a woman sometime in her lifetime will be diagnosed with breast cancer. 200,000 women a year are diagnosed with breast cancer. About 40,000 die. This is in this country, die. So I understood probabilities, and I knew that, it could happen to me. And I think just because I believe in a loving God doesn't mean that everything goes smoothly in life. I think it means that when you hit the tough times, which everybody does at some time or other, you have something more to hang on to, and something more that gives you strength to go through that. And I actually think that good things can actually come out of bad occurrences. So even though cancer isn't a good thing, I think there can be some good results that come out as a result of that. And certainly, cancer is weird, because usually you have this idea that if you're sick, you feel sick. If you're fine, you feel fine. And suddenly with cancer, it's not necessarily true. I felt fine. I was sick, so you can't really tell. And you also think, you hear these statistics like, okay, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women sometime in their lifetime will get cancer. And you think, okay, I'm going to be one of those that doesn't get it, right? Problem is, you don't get to choose. So suddenly, for the first time, a lot of things in life you can choose, and this is one of those things that you can't. So I guess I just thought, this has happened, and God has allowed it to happen. I didn't think of God causing it to happen, but I thought, He's allowed it to happen, and He's with me in it, and He will give me the strength to go through it, again, with the support of and encouragement of a lot of friends. Yeah.
You described the research you did in graduate school as not really having a practical application. So what initially drew you to it?
Okay, so the question is, and I'm repeating this because sometimes on the video they can't pick it up, but I guess you asked, the basic research I was doing didn't necessarily have a practical application. What drew me to that? Someone told me when I was a junior that they were going to do their junior project on solid state physics, which is what it was called then. I thought, that's really dull, because I thought of a block of aluminum and it just sits on the table and it doesn't do anything, and that looked really boring. Why would you ever want to work on that? I think when you get closer to it, now I think aluminum is interesting, actually, and we're studying it. But I think part of it is that I read an article in, you could say I did my senior thesis in this sort of basic research, and I had read an article in Scientific American about the discovery of superfluid helium-3 and kind of the neat things that does. And that's what first drew me, that there's I guess the way that Phil Anderson had posed the problem was that he said, well, you know, in quantum mechanics, whatever, in basic textbooks, you learn all about the atom and hydrogen atom, you know, helium atom. And the little atom's kind of simple. But you put them all, a whole bunch of them together, and suddenly it becomes superfluid. It can flow forever without any viscosity. I mean, there's sorts of weird things that happen from, you can't just extrapolate up and just say, okay, I know what happens to one, so just multiply it by n. And I think it was this interest that you suddenly realize that the stuff around us are actually very interesting. I think the actual problem I worked on for my thesis, PhD thesis, was basically chosen by my advisor. You know, you go to the guy and you say, well, I want to work with you, what do I do? And they just say, well, okay, here's this problem. And, you know, but they present it in a way that says, you know, you would expect this to happen, but it doesn't. And I like simple problems. I like to understand how things work. So if you present something to me in a very simple yet intriguing way, you know, it should be like this, but it's not. It's like this other thing. That's what intrigues me. Yeah?
Would you say you ever faced any discrimination as a woman in your field, and if so, like, how did you handle it?
So how did I ever face discrimination, and how have I handled it? You know, I think when I was younger, I didn't really think there was discrimination. I just thought that was just some, I don't know, feminist, you know, people were worried about that. And so I didn't really see that. I think as I've grown older and I've been trained by some of my friends, I see it as a much more subtle thing. It's more subconscious. It's not overt. It's more just subconscious. So when, for example, when we sometimes organize conferences, the men on the committee will say, okay, well, let's do a symposium with these 5 speakers. And then someone will say, well, those are great speakers, but they're all men. Aren't there any women? And so suddenly they say, oh, yeah, okay. It's not that there aren't qualified women. They just don't think about it. And so I think it's more just subconscious. You just don't think about it. And it's this, so we've made an effort to sort of raise awareness about that. I do think that women and men sort of have different challenges. There has been research on this where you say women have more problems, I think, with self-esteem and feeling like they're not good enough or they're dumb. I talked about feeling that way. And so they've done studies where they gave men, asked men and women, how well do you think you're going to do on this test? The men say how well they think they'll do, and women say, women tend to think they do about half as well as they actually do. Men think they tend to do about 5 times better than they actually score. They have a lot more confidence or bravado or something. So it's something you see, and I do try to encourage women in physics to go on and that they can do it. Yeah.
Kind of going off that, have you ever faced discrimination as a Christian in research?
You know, I don't generally tend to advertise it. I don't. I think in academia there's a lot of just feelings that, okay, well, if you're weak, then, you know, maybe you need God, but we don't. And they sort of say, you know, I will sometimes be at dinner or lunch with colleagues who will say maybe not very nice things about Christians, sort of stereotyping them, and I tend not to say anything. I mean, I just sort of like just eat my food and don't tell them that I'm a Christian because I don't want to be lumped into. But I think I remember once a friend, and he's a very good physicist in Illinois, and he said, gee, you know, I have these Christians in my group, and, you know, they're not very good or whatever. And I heard him say this a few times, and finally I said, Mike, I'm a Christian. He's like, you are? Oh, that's great. He said, that means that there's, you know, he likes distribution. That means they're not just dumb ones, but they're smart ones too. So you know, I guess you know, we don't really advertise it, and basically it's not an issue that comes up a whole lot, and certainly because of the feeling, I don't certainly tell people that. Yeah.
You know, just reading this morning, but since you're a physicist, the question of the nucleus of an atom, where you got neutrons and all positive particles, I guess the term is used, nuclear glue. Do you know anything more about that? What holds all this stuff together? Because without that, there is nothing. It's gone.
Well, I mean, you know, Jonathan would be better at answering this than I would, but basically, this is particle physics, and they do have particles. There is something called the strong force, which helps to hold these, you have all these protons and nucleus. You say, well, positive charge all should repel, so why does it stay together? And there's actually stronger forces called strong force, and they're little particles called gluons, right, like glue, which hold it together. So they've explored this in the laboratory, and they see evidence for these things. So there is really something called a standard model, which is quite a good theory of that. Yeah.
What drives you or motivates you to continue with academia or with your career right now and not move to something else?
I guess this is what I like to do. I think I like, everybody I think is made differently, and people have different things they like and are good at. To me, I ask a lot of questions, and so I like to know how things work and why things are the way they are, and I like to say, okay, no one knows that, why, like in breast cancer, right? Over half of the tumors occur in the upper outer quadrant of the breast, right near the armpit. That's weird. Why does it happen? And it's these sort of questions, simple questions that intrigue me, and which I really enjoy sort of investigating and looking at. I mean, every job has tedious stuff. There's always where you're writing the paper and you really don't want to go through all these little details. But I think I do like the idea of learning new things, of being able to, being in an academic environment and having tenure, you have academic freedom. So you can actually, that's what gives me the freedom to not just do what I've been doing for the last 20 years, but to say, okay, I want to go in this new direction. I want to explore new things. And I have the freedom to do that. We have wonderful researchers here at the university and colleagues. You can go to them, who's people who are an expert in this and that, and talk to them, listen to their talks. And it's a very exciting thing to do intellectually. It's something I like to do. So it sort of fits me, and that's why. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have like a favorite research project that you've worked on? And
Favorite research project? I don't know. There's some that come out cuter than others. That make a nice story that you can talk about and you can tell people. I'm trying to think. Was there anything that? Right now, I'm kind of drawing a blank as to what the thing is that I like the best. Some things certainly make easier talks to give to people and tell a nice story. There's some fantastic. If you haven't, one of the neat things I was telling you about biology, if you haven't seen it, go Google Inner Life of the Cell. It's this 3-minute video, has music, but it shows just all the neat, a cell is like a city, and it has all these, there's a transportation system, a library, post office, the whole policeman, garbage, the whole 9 yards, and it's just really neat to see that they're we studied, for example, little porter proteins, little motor proteins that carry bags of stuff along roads inside the cell, because there's transportation, stuff needs to go places, and it's a fascinating thing. So there have been a lot of cool things. Yes?
Do you have a favorite physicist?
Do I have a favorite physicist? I have a lot of friends who are physicists. But, if I had to say who's the best physicist I know personally, I would say Phil Anderson. And he was the guy that I did my senior thesis and PhD thesis with. And I have to say, even though I know other Nobel laureates, he really does stand out as the best physicist. So.
You've talked a lot about your relationship with God as like a guiding force in your life. I'm wondering if there are any other role models or large influences you've had who have kind of helped you and held your hand throughout your life.
So I said that God is the guiding influences, but you're asking if I've had other people, mentors that role models that have helped me through it. Certainly, I think, as I said, I couldn't have gotten here if it hadn't been for other. So I think Phil Anderson was my thesis advisor, Doug Osheroff, who I mentioned as a mentor. I think Laura Green is another physicist who's helped me a lot. And I have friends from church who often are very good at skills, prayer, whatever, that have been encouraging. So there have been people that, yeah, I like to sound off on. I like to ask, I'm thinking of this. What do you think about it? And that certainly has been a source of help. But it's certainly, I have a good friend, Sue Coppersmith, who's a physicist at Wisconsin. And so there have been a lot of people that I've been either friends or who have acted as mentors in my life. And certainly when I came here, I think Doug Mills was a senior professor, and he certainly helped with showing us the ropes of how to be faculty. Angel.
You said that that you like to think about questions in physics and dystopian questions out there. As you're applying this to scripture, as you're reading through it, do you currently have any questions that as you kind of read through scripture, are you kind of more metaphysical, I guess, more kind of out there questions that you just kind of ponder and currently, or what are the types of questions?
So you're asking if as I read scripture, whether it raises questions that cause me to ponder.
And what are those?
And what are those? I don't think I get so much the science problems from the Bible. That's not really what I look to for scientific text. Sometimes, there might be passages I don't understand or I don't really appreciate until I have the problem that the guy in the Bible has, and then I suddenly understand what he's talking about. Suddenly I'm running into people opposing me, and oh yeah, okay, I understand these things about opposition, but not really. I can't really think of at the moment. Yeah.
If there was one thing about God you wish everyone could know, what would that thing be?
There's one thing about God I wished everyone could know. What would that thing be? I guess that there is a God and that He loves you. That would be the short. Are there any other questions that anybody has?
Can you tell us a little about your parents?
Tell you about my parents.
Because they obviously inspired you to...
Yeah, and certainly I mentioned my mother a lot. I'm in the first generation Chinese. My parents were born and raised in China, and they actually came from quite wealthy families. My grandfather, my mother's side, was a governor and a senator very early in the 1900s, and then my parents came over right after World War II in '47, and because the communists took over, they decided not to go back to China, so they stayed here. Otherwise, I would have been born in China, I guess. And they came over to go to graduate school. And so my mother, both my parents studied economics and accounting, and so my father was professor of accounting, and he's retired from the University of Florida. My mother was a certified public accountant. She was the first woman CPA in Gainesville, Florida, way back in the 70s. So she was always, my parents never said, "You're a woman, you can't do physics, do so." My parents always said, do whatever you want to do and just try your best. I remember asking, do I have to make straight A's? They said, no, just do your best. If best is a C, that's fine, but just do your best. And so they always held open that I was the opportunities to do anything. And certainly my mother felt that, women should to have just as many opportunities as men. So I think, that has helped. And certainly their love and support and believing in me has been a good source of inspiration. Any other questions?
Well, colleagues, friends, let's thank Professor Clare.
Thank you.